Hey everyone, Brayden here, and the Birthday Horror series is officially finished after 4 parts. Well, not really. I do plan on continuing the story in the future, but now I just want to focus on other fanfics I've been writing. But with this being my first series on the channel, you may have been confused on some things. So I'm going to be recapping the full story of the series and everything you need to know. So let's get started, everybody. So this story follows Brayden, named after me, and his now 6-year-old little brother Evan is having a birthday party at Chuck E. Cheese. When they get to the pizzeria, Evan runs straight for the play area and his mom yells at Brayden to go look for him. As Brayden searches for him, Evan pops out of nowhere, scaring Brayden. Evan's whole behavior exhausts Brayden, so he tries to go to a corner and play on his phone. But his mom snatches it, forcing Brayden to play with his brother. But Brayden has an alternative. While Evan tries to play hide-and-seek with Brayden, he could ditch Evan and hide somewhere and be by himself. But then, out of nowhere, a mysterious person in a Chuck E. Cheese costume comes skipping out of the bathroom towards Brayden. This highly unsettles Brayden, so he decides to go looking for Evan anyway. While in the play tunnels, he gets to a dead end that led to a ball pit. As Brayden angrily shouted for Evan, Evan appears from behind and pushes Brayden into the pit and then proceeds to spit on him. Brayden has a lot of difficulty getting out of the pit and he screams for help. But once he resurfaces, there's a net over the pit. He then hears his mom shouting his name, saying it's time for cake. But somehow, Brayden is not heard or seen by anyone. The person in the Chuck E. Cheese costume Brayden had seen earlier skips towards his mom. He then pressed what Brayden presumed was some sort of button. And after he does that, Brayden's mom recognizes the man as Brayden. For the rest of Evan's party, the mascot had been replacing Brayden, while the real Brayden was still trapped in the ball pit, watching it all. Once Evan and his mom leave the pizzeria, the mascot takes one final look at Brayden, waves at him, and says to him, "Sweet dreams." So part 2 takes place the morning after Evan's party and follows Bob, a clumsy man who was recently hired to work at Chuck E. Cheese. Not the best job, but his bills were becoming super intense, and he has a friend who works there, Jeremy. As soon as Bob walks out the door, he was interrupted by his neighbor Alex, who was trying to sell him chocolate bars. Bob gets fed up with Alex and yells at him to go away. But given that Alex is an 8-year-old child, he doesn't take this very well, and he threatens to tell his mom. Bob clearly doesn't have time for any of that, so he runs out of the building. Once Bob gets to Chuck E. Cheese, he decides to go into the staff room where his friend Jeremy was changing into costume. They talked for a bit about how hyper the kids were. Once Bob leaves, a kid runs to him saying that someone is sleeping in the ball pit and they won't get out. Bob agrees to check it out and he goes towards the ball pit. When Bob gets there, he sees Brayden unconscious in the ball pit. Brayden had passed out after being trapped in the pit for so long, especially overnight. But Bob is completely unaware of everything that's happened. Bob attempts to wake him up, but he's interrupted when Jeremy comes out of the staff room with the suit on. Bob then goes to the staff room for the bag of tickets, as his job is to toss them in the air while kids try to catch them. Once it's break time, Jeremy heads to the staff room and Bob follows him to tell him about the kids sleeping in the ball pit. While Bob is talking to Jeremy, the evil mascot pops out of the ball pit and takes Brayden's body into the play tunnels. And when Bob and Jeremy arrive, Brayden is gone. Jeremy just assumes that the kid woke up and ran off somewhere, but Bob isn't fully convinced of this. Later that night, when Bob was sleeping peacefully in his bed, he was awakened by a door creaking open. He gets up seeing that his front door is completely wide opened. He panics thinking that someone broke into his room and he immediately locks the door. Rather than looking around or calling the police, Bob thinks that as long as his door is locked, he can go back to bed, which would be the biggest mistake of his entire life. Because once Bob goes to bed and closes his eyes, he hears very close footsteps next to him. When he opens his eyes, he sees a man in a Chuck E. Cheese costume lurking over his bed. Although this suit is different than the one that Jeremy wore at the restaurant, it looked rotten and very decayed. Bob screamed as loud as he could, but no one heard him. Just like how no one heard Brayden. The mascot told him sweet dreams before ending Bob's life. We then cut to the play tunnels in the pizzeria where Brayden had just woken up. He looks around and wonders where he is. Part 3 takes place at the exact moment where Part 2 left off, with Brayden waking up in the play tunnels after being dragged in by the mascot. He looks around and realizes the incident from Evan's party wasn't a dream. He decides to jump into the pit to see if the net that trapped him was still there, and to his surprise, it wasn't. But before he can make his escape, the mascot walks towards the building and busts open the door. Brayden hid in the slides, doing his best to avoid him. After the mascot mysteriously powers on the animatronics in arcade games, Brayden sees a staff room office. This gives him the idea to sneak in past the mascot and hide in there until the doors open. Brayden attempts to be quiet, but is caught in the process. The mascot chases him with a kitchen knife before Brayden slams the office door in his face. Realizing the situation that he's in, he scraps his plan of staying overnight and decides he needs to get out of the building entirely. While trying to think of a plan, Brayden sees a lighter by one of the monitors. Brayden decides if he can find a way to trap the mascot, he can burn the place down with him inside. He runs out of the office looking for the mascot, but surprisingly, he was nowhere to be found. But then, weird occurrences started happening. Jazz music with disturbing lyrics started playing, and the animatronics were staring at him every step he took. But then, he sees a gray hand peek out from the show curtain. The mascot then pops out and chases Brayden all the way to the entrance door. Once they reach the door, Brayden stops, and so does the mascot. Brayden flicks the lighter, and he tells him sweet dreams. A nice little throwback to what the mascot said to him in the first one. Brayden tosses the lighter and runs out of the building, and then blocks the door with a crowbar. The mascot tries to break it open, but it's no use. Brayden looks from afar, knowing the mascot will die in the fire, and runs off home. But unfortunately, the mascot is able to break out through the emergency exit, and says that he has plans for Evan. So remember how the mascot replaced Brayden and went home with Evan and his mom? Well, part 4 takes place exactly after that, with the mascot going with Evan into his room. But Evan notices static hovering over the mascot's body. But the mascot comes up with a lie saying that he's a video game character that came out of his console to give Evan a good birthday. Being the innocent 6-year-old, Evan believes him. The mascot then tells him to close his eyes and he will give him a surprise present when he opens them. Evan opens his eyes less than 5 seconds later and sees the mascot's full appearance along with his knife. Realizing that he can no longer trick Evan, he decides he has to finish Evan the hard way, which means killing him while he's fully aware. Before he can get a chance to kill him, he hears Evan's mom coming upstairs, so the mascot jumps out of the window and flees from the house. After the incident, the police arrive and ask Evan and his mom questions about what happened. Later that night, while Evan was trying to go to sleep, he heard fast-walking footsteps in his bedroom. After that, his closet doors opened and slammed repeatedly. Evan knew something was wrong, so he hid under his blanket and covered his head with a pillow. Then the mascot finally comes out of the closet. Okay, please do not take that out of context, guys. Seriously, please. The mascot pretends to look for Evan in certain places, until he finally tosses off the blanket and grabs Evan. He tosses Evan by his dresser and grabs him by the neck. He, of course, doesn't manage to do this because Evan's mom starts running down the hallway. So he drops Evan and hides under his bed, and disappears when Evan's mom checks. The next day, Evan is highly shooken up from the incident and is in defense mode the entire day. When nighttime arrived, Evan's mom gave Evan a red button before he went to bed, telling him it's for safety reasons. When she left, Evan checked his doorway and his closet to make sure the mascot wasn't there, because he knew he was going to come back this time. After doing a search, Evan just decided to go to bed. But not long after, something had tapped him on his shoulder. Nobody was there when he opened his eyes, but the red button was gone. The mascot's voice asks Evan if he's looking for something, revealing himself holding the button. He says that he overheard what the button's purpose was, and that his mom's plan won't work, and he threatens to kill Evan and his mom. Rather than being scared, Evan is infuriated by this and attacks the mascot. He throws a soccer ball at the mascot and kicks him in the back of his leg, and while Evan tries to get the button from him, the mascot smashes it to pieces right in front of Evan. and proceeds to gash Evan's arm open with his knife. Evan begs for his life, but the mascot doesn't listen. Soon after, the police burst into the room with their guns pointed at the mascot. They put him in handcuffs and put him in a police car. Evan is then reunited with his mom, and then they are asked questions by the sheriff. Soon after, Braden walks into the room and is reunited with his little brother. The sheriff reveals that one of his officers found Braden running on the sidewalk after the pizzeria had burned down. And so with that, the family is reunited and the mascot is taken to prison. But even though part 4 is the final chapter, the story isn't exactly over yet. So you can expect to see more parts to this series once I actually get to wrap up some of my other fanfics. Thank you guys so much for sticking around with me on my first series, and I'll see you guys later.